All right, y'all, we back here. This is the Keep It Clean podcast. This is going to be a one-off, and what we are here to do today is address the state that I'm in, good old Texas. We're going to cover a wide range of things, but today, unfortunately, we are addressing all types of buffoonery that is happening out here in the Lone Star State, and we are not going to be alone once we start pushing these shenanigans. So we got to get straight to it. As we were entering the pod, we were talking about control. Texas is coming out with the 10 Commandments in the school, man. And Brother Bo was about to he drop some bars, man. Get it off your chest, my man.
Listen, man, listen. If you're looking at if you look at it, Project 2025, if you're looking at what's going on in the state of Texas, what's going on in the other Republican held states, there is one thing that ties them all together, and that is control. Now, of course, we live in a capitalist society where, control is meant to extract labor. But one thing that's very, very important to know about our white Christian friends is that you're not approaching this from a, how do I say this? Religion is not a system of belief, it is a system of control for them. It is a system of hierarchy. It is not a, I believe in God, therefore I believe all people should be free. It is a anointment by God. God is just the figurehead of control and hierarchy to justify whatever needs to happen, right? And so this is why so many politicians are, they align themselves with Christianity, and it's not because you and your mom in the black church believe the same thing that they believe. That's not the case. It's not even close to the case. It's more so they believe in hierarchy. Jesus is that set hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
We're next, whites, and then everything else is like you fall in line, basically. This is
And
why there's such a pushing agenda against DEI initiatives, against gay rights, against trans rights, anything that doesn't align with white Christianity and the hierarchy that they see. Got to get it out of here.
and don't want to blow past the fact that that specific Christianity, the white Christianity, sometimes being subservient to more or less Zionist views in that process of it as well. You know, you're going to run into issues as what we're seeing here. For example, the 10 Commandments being mandated as classroom essentials. You run into those issues where you understand most of these styles of white Christianity, they don't know the Bible. They know what somebody else told them about it. They're not actually practicing a belief, and that's what makes it very difficult for those who do believe in things, or specifically those non-white Christians, and for the persecution of the Islam followers as within this country, the way that they're going about handling their religion. Or a lot of times what frustrates me is just the purely New Testament Christians. Like you only know, you only try to tell me what is allegedly in red from your regurgitation. That's why I say allegedly, because you genuinely don't know. You didn't read the books. You don't know the process of how it got there in the first place, but you're quick to try to tell somebody what's going on with their lifestyle. And it's frustrating. And Texas is on to, I'll put it this way. When's the last time, when we're talking about swing states, when we're talking about influential states, I can't remember a time frame, at least within my tenure, especially being political or voting or whatever the case may be, where Texas was this heavily utilized as the forefront of examples, even for the Republican Party. It's always led red. Don't get me wrong. That was
Mhm.
that was kind of like in the chamber, but it's not the swing state that Georgia always once was. Pennsylvania, you know what I'm saying? And the midterms had always been treated like Texas is just doing Texas things. right? And I make this statement. I say this all the time. I still double down on it. If you've been out here and you've lived here for a little bit, honestly, Texas is everything that they say the American dream is. For the most part, whatever your beliefs are, it doesn't matter. You can find a spot and be comfortable living those types of beliefs. And then the voting system here had always led to some type of success. You're gonna lose some battles, but you overall in the war that you're fighting, whatever your lifestyle, you can find that here in this
Yeah.
state somewhere. It's whether you want your acres and away from the city, you could do that all the way to being in the city. The fact that the rural areas lean red, but your biggest cities, arguably some of the biggest in the country, heavily blue. You can find your mix and match, which you don't get from everywhere else, and it's just so big that you can find some type of landscape that you into, but you can't
Yeah.
escape that heat. And we need to apply that heat to the state. So I'm gonna get straight to it, man. What's happening right now? Just giving you a situation overview for those that are listening. Texas is in the middle of trying to push a redistricting battle as of August 2025. It's been going on for a little bit. It started as rumors, but this is a Trump directive to Governor Abbott down here, and they're doing a Republican led redistricting push, right? Backed by Trump's directives, aggressively moving to redraw the U.S. congressional district lines, and their proposed maps aim to gain up to 5 additional GOP seats ahead of the 2026 midterms, which is major. So, in the process of doing this, as of last week, top of last week, they're supposed to be going into session. Democratic lawmakers fled the state in protest. About over 50 Democratic state lawmakers have left Texas. They headed to other blue states such as Illinois, California, New York, Massachusetts to deny the legislative quorum needed to approve it. So, in response to that, Abbott had called for ongoing special sessions until the map passes, authorized civil arrest warrants, which is crazy, which are non-enforceable beyond state lines. Let's be clear here. So they can't go extradite them. They can't just go bring them back. And there's rumors that they are trying to get possible use of quo warrants to process and FBI involvement to compel those lawmakers to return. And now, so what that leads to, national backlash and retaliation talks. And the Democratic leaders in states like California, Illinois, and New York are possibly contemplating retaliatory redistricting. Right. That's the intro. Let's start off. We could get into the nitty gritty. What's your initial response? What's your thought process so far? And at the end of it, we probably touch on the legal and election planning challenges that this is going to create. But where are you at with it, sir?
So let's back up a little bit because I think it's very important to talk about what's happening in Texas. It's also important to talk about the potential retaliatory aspects coming from the blue led states as well. Um, the congressional district districting is supposed to happen after the census, right? So
Mm-hmm.
census happens, population growth is measured in each part of the country in the United States, and then redistricting happens afterwards to account for the new population and how they may lean one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
It's intended or initially, right? Like if you go way back to the 1800s, it's intended to be a representative um format so that when you vote, right, your vote is counted as you voted, right? So like your particular neighborhood may be all blue, you guys all voted blue. That shows up on a map that okay, this particular area leaned heavily here. What happens with the redrawing of lines is that that neighborhood could be split
Yes.
so that instead of that neighborhood itself voting blue, you have that neighborhood split and it gets added to two red districts and now that entire section is red instead.
Mm-hmm.
What this does on like a on a state level or on a national level means that the representatives that you have in office are not necessarily the ones that you yourself voted for. right? Um, and that directly impacts laws. It impacts new bills. It impacts, it impacts corporate. What's the word? Corporate. I cannot think of the word. But when corporations decide that they want to influence elections and all those other kind of things, and so like it really just becomes who has the largest pocket.
So
The
more so
other
corporate
issue with
lobbying.
this, huh? Oh, lobbying.
Corporate
Yes.
lobbying. Yeah.
Yes. It impacts lobbying as well. And so the other thing that happens here is that when you vote, these representatives are in office, they are usually the ones who are responsible for the redrawing of the lines. The
Right.
governors of each state are responsible for confirming or rejecting those redrawings. And so it just becomes a big political thing. So like in Texas, this effectively eliminates the Democratic vote in its entirety. Is
And
what its actual aim is to do. Which means
and with
that
that, really quick, let me
yeah,
be specific to that, right? For the details of that. So those districts, what's going to happen if this passes, where right now in the USC, if they do this redistricting, that's going to be 5 additional seats from Texas in the congressional house, right? So going from 25 out of the 38 total, making it up to 30 seats in total for the Republican Party. And that's damn near about 80% of it, right? So to the parts where Bo is talking about splitting it, these are major places where, just like I was saying, man, Texas is that place where you could do anything. The rural areas were already red. They're splitting specifically the cities. So this is from Dallas to Austin, specifically down in South Houston, where it's aiming for all of the districts which are predominantly either black or Latino based. And even for the parts that weren't necessarily blue, those areas that could have been either or, like a couple votes, those areas that were always up in the air every midterm election, the way that the redistricting hits is going to be completely red. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's a solid red. Because if you don't know, Texas has what's called the triangle, right? Highway 35, which will take you from San Antonio through Austin to Dallas, Highway 45 from Dallas to Houston, and then I-10, that one that runs across the nation. It puts you in that triangle. All of those cities, from Houston to San Antonio up to Dallas, there's a triangle. Blue, up, straight up and down across the board. They're going to split all of that, even down in South Texas. So it's very important to know those details, because what you're saying is very hard to grasp if you can't visualize it.
yeah,
Right. So they're cutting directly through the cities, the more or less safe havens for the Democratic Party in the state. You know.
exactly. And I mean, really, on a large scale, the directives that you're seeing in Texas, and usually, like historically, Texas has always been Texas. So, regardless of what Republicans may have wanted to do or Democrats have wanted to do, Texas has always moved in this very independent manner, right? Because
Hmm.
they were a country, and then they joined the United States, but they've always had this like stance that they can succeed at any point. And so they've always moved very independently. This is a fundamental change to how Texas handles its politics. Being a
Hmm.
Trump led directive, if Texas becomes this stronghold for the Trump style of administration specifically, because this is more than just Democrats and Republicans, right? This is more than just Democrats and independents. This Trump has a very particular brand of Republic nationalism that they are taking nationwide effectively. You saw this with the January 6th riots. You see this with Project 2025 specifically. And so that side of the Republicans have gone with a very you get down or you lay down stance. And
Yes.
normally, politically, with this being Trump's final term, we'll see what, because anything can happen. We'll see what happens. But normally, a president wouldn't have this much influence, this much authority, um, unless it's tied to something. And in this case, it's tied directly to financials, which is why you're seeing all of these lavish gifts being given to the president, which are against the law, by the
Yep.
way. They are technically against the law, but since the Supreme Court ruling last year, they are no longer technically against the law because they are done in the service of the United States. So this is why you're seeing all these lavish gifts, and all these kind of Republicans fall in line with what Trump wants, regardless of their individual stance or anything like that, because it's all financially backed.
Yep. And let's not gloss past the fact that this entire redistricting that's going on, there's only Democratic seats that are affected. Not a single Republican seat has been touched by the proposed maps. So when you're looking at it, it's even listed while Trump gave the directive. It's hard to not feel as if the governor didn't specify particular parties that they were going after.
Mhm.
Representative Crockett up in the Dallas area, based on the redistricting map, she don't even live in her district no more. The way that it's drawn out. Representative Greg Kasar down in Austin, right? He has predominantly he represents the biggest Latino majority Democratic district in the state. That whole thing would be eliminated, right? And it's crazy because the voting rights advocates would say that this dilutes the Latino vote. And then down in District 9, where you have Representative Al Green down in the ninth district, his would be redrawn, potentially turning it into a Republican leaning Hispanic district. And that's unprecedented because or not it's not unprecedented. I'm sorry, I misspoke. These are districts that have already had the Department of Justice speaking about them for racial implications when it came to voting in the past. And they're going back to essentially, let's get to the meat and potatoes of it. They're gerrymandering, right? They're gerrymandering the state. And it's not that we haven't seen this before. I think it's hitting waves, just like what you were saying, because we haven't seen Texas get involved, which is two parts. I'm of the impression that they made a plan A and a plan B. There's essentially a potential where he might extend his presidential term. He might. I also am surprised that Texas gets involved because usually, like you said, it has a reputation. We more or less do whatever we want. I see a presidential bid trying to be placed off the back of this. If it's not Trump, it might be Abbott. That's the failsafe because I'm not of the impression that those two necessarily get along. This is
No.
a
Yeah.
this is a business transaction that's happening right now. You help you one hand washes the other, but there's some dirty tactic that's bound to come down the line because reading the play, you're making this move 8 months into your term, right? In a situation where you do already have majority of Congress on your side. I'm not saying it's not needed to sufficiently run your campaign, but it is also looking like one of those situations as President Trump, your constituents aren't believing in you as much anymore. So now you have to do certain moves to where you have the right and left looking back at Trump as if this isn't it. And solidifying these seats is where we get here. Uh, Now, here the consequences behind it. Because if did you want to break down gerrymandering for those that may not understand the full definition of it?
Yeah, definitely. So gerrymandering is a process in which district lines are drawn in a specific format to get a desired outcome. So, districts ideally, in a more ideal sense, should be small, and they should be small and be counted evenly. But depending upon how you draw a map, directly correlates to who gets elected and who doesn't get elected. Gerrymandering is the specific process of drawing the lines to get a specific outcome. So in this case, we want more Republican seats. We're going to redistrict everyone so that blue votes count less, red votes basically count more. We get these 5 additional seats. It effectively washes away any Democratic power, both in the short term and long term, in the state of
Hmm.
Texas. And best believe if Texas gets this off, other states will do this because again, this isn't like it's the year 2025, right? So the last census we had was 2020, 2021. That is
Hmm.
when redistricting occurs. It occurred in Texas in 2021. It was approved by the governor. Um, that's when it happens. A mid-cycle gerrymandering, like it's almost unprecedented in the modern sense.
Yep.
And can completely, if like I said, Texas gets this off, every other red state will enact something similar.
And don't I don't want it to be missed too, because we are not in any way, shape, or form acting as if this is the first time we've seen gerrymandering, even on one side of the spectrum. Illinois, New York, and California are known to have their own versions of gerrymandering themselves, right? As of right now, Illinois currently holds 14 of the 17 congressional seats, which kind of suggests an overrepresentation and inconsistent with statewide vote share. You got New York, what was it, Governor? I know her first name's Kathy. What's her last name? Hochul, whatever.
Kathy Polk, I think so.
Okay, yeah, Kathy.
Don't get me
I
lying.
thought it started with an H, but she, from my studies,
Hope
embraced aggressive gerrymandering. Hochul,
Hochul.
Hochul. Yeah, so Governor Hochul embraced aggressive gerrymandering strategies, benefiting the Democrats amid national partisan pushback. Right. Same with Cali, even though California is different. They have their own independent redistricting commission, which probably have to do more research about it. If I'm understanding it correctly, it at least adds what's supposed to be a non-biased layer. So if that's the case, you would think that would apply to the other states, but they have their own, and Democrats appear to enjoy the structural edge because of the urban population cluster. So it saves the seats for them. And last but not least, Wisconsin. They're not strictly a Democratic state, but they had situations back in 2011 where redistricting heavily favored Republicans there. And even when Democrats won a majority of the vote in 2018, it's still kind of like a give and pull of their redistricting. Why this one is so specific is, like you were saying, we're in the we're in the middle of the decade. This will affect not only the next midterms, the next election. We're looking at a decade's worth of effects down the line, because the census that comes up won't be until 2030. And then specifically to that, why that's important. One of the key components of this real life gerrymandering is the prison gerrymandering, right?
Mm-hmm.
In Republican states, what often happens when it comes to these seats is they will build prisons in rural white areas. So here's how it works. When the census occurs, your place of living is wherever you were in the free world. So they'll give you, like, say, for example, if you were living in Houston, that's where they would mark you. Your address is in Houston. But when you're arrested, you go through the process and you end up being sent to prison. You and your place of residence on the citizen side is still in Houston. For the election purposes, you're counted as a resident of that area. And most of your prisons are going to be out in the rural areas, which will then affect the seats. So they get to pick and choose where you technically align, because you don't get to vote as a prisoner, right?
Exactly.
So a lot of your rural areas are utilizing that, because now when you got a prison population, not only do you lose the vote in wherever you probably would have been when, and let's be specific here, why that prison gerrymandering matters is because it's mostly black and brown people. So those black and brown votes that more than likely weren't going to be Republican, well, I'll say black vote based on the last election for the brown side, nah, 50-50, right? But it, 50, 50, right? So now that we're looking at that, all those black votes have been taken away and then now are being utilized for that rural Republican map. And that's going to be the situation in a lot of your red states. That is a key piece when it comes down to the real, not real life, the other side of the gerrymandering aspect, because those seats are going to be hard to take away as they keep adding to that population, which only benefits them. That's a very key component there.
Definitely. I mean, it's like the prison gerrymandering is it's so it's
Get to it.
when you start talking about taking away control, right? Again, you go back to, you know, black Americans being 13% of the population, yet they are 80% of the prison population in the United States. And so when you talk about that, you're talking about, you're taking away key key power from communities and then counting that power against them, right? Like,
Hmm.
you are there are something like 2 million prisoners in the United States. Again, 80% of them are black, which means that the majority of that 2 million is getting counted directly towards Republican
Yep.
redistricting. That's a it's a crazy stat because they can't vote, they don't have the power, so they, at the very least, they shouldn't count at all, but they count.
and and it affects more than that too, because this includes tuition and public benefits, right? That gets manipulated. So since prisoners are not typically considered residents for things like in-state tuition, public assistance, local services, unless the state law explicitly allows it, all those benefits are going to the people, and you're almost getting double the vote living in that rural area, which is insanity in itself, right? So for the whole election process, of for the last two elections, as a matter of fact, the complaints of false votes, you got people manipulating the voting system, they're trying to do whatever form of blocks. With the prison gerrymandering, you get two sets of votes. You get two sets of votes that get to play into your functions, and then now the local funding also changes it, and that funding is going to go back to that rural white areas, because sometimes the counties, you have housing prisons that may receive state funding based on prison population. So this goes for healthcare or emergency services, but the
Mhm.
prisoners don't see any of those any of those benefits,
No,
right?
none at all. None at
and
all.
and and so now here's where the jurisdiction for that specifically matters, because some states like Cali, Colorado, New York, they pass laws to count incarcerated people at the last known address. That's very important. That's very important when you're coming down to places like Texas, because now when they're doing that districting, wherever you were last in the free world gets to apply to those areas. And as far as I know, I think in total there's only 8 states that operate that way, where they will leave you at your last place of residence, at least for even the voting side of it. So until the other states get updated, it's a manipulated system, and most
Which
people don't know what prison gerrymandering is, so it's hard to keep up with that.
which they likely won't. They likely won't. I mean, just so for the people who were for the people who are curious, right? So states that have a fully independent redistricting, why am I having such a hard time with that word? Um, but have an independent system for these congressional lines. There's California, Arizona, Colorado, and Michigan. And then there's a group of like semi-independent, which they kind of work with the state, but they also have they're kind of independent, is Washington, Idaho, Hawaii, Montana, and New Jersey. And if you're reading, you know what I'm saying, you're listening to those names, you'll notice that there is a trend here that the majority of these independent congressional lines are, they're Democratic.
Mhm.
Montana and Idaho, they usually lean Republican. And then Arizona is always like a toss up, but for the most part, you can see how this sets out. Um, for everyone else, for every other state, it's led directly by the state's legislation, and who knows? Who knows who, what, when, where, why, and how? The difference between like, and I was doing this yesterday because I was looking at the difference between Michigan and Georgia. It's a stark difference. Some of them easy Google search. Some of them you're going to be fed 4 or 5 different websites that are kind of guesstimating on what they are because everybody has a different process.
Right. And that, so let me ask you that. Should that continue to be left up to the state, or should that be a federal situation where you mandate regulations?
Uh I feel like I feel like it's a slippery slope. It's a real,
Hmm.
if you put it in Fed control, then it is also easily manipulated and can't be fought against if it goes the wrong way. Right? Like if it gets put into Fed control, then it's um liable to lobbying or any other things like on the federal level. You could make it an independent group, or like an independent board, like formerly the Board of Education. But we've seen the president can just come in and decide that this group no longer exists.
Right.
you
Because
know
it,
I think
if
it's in the states, each individual state's best interest to keep it with the states, but it's in the people's best interest for it to be independent of the state.
because part of the problem, at least at the state level, that I'm seeing is not all states have a guideline,
Yeah,
right? So it there is you're damn near winging it as you go, and why that could be an issue, because I understand the slippery slope piece. I don't know if it would be more beneficial or advantageous to have maybe not federal control, but at least like a federal guideline of saying, give you some wiggle room within that guideline to do it, because what's happening here, while we go state by state, if this passes successfully, there's a national power shift. And
yeah,
Texas would then essentially have more members in the US House than any other state other than California, right? And if you thought we were annoying now, I don't know what you were expecting if you were to give so, because so now you kind of create almost this battle where Cali and Texas would almost have to kind of wash each other out, and you would be
yeah,
relying on everybody else to play their role. So in an example of that, if California is going to be heavily blue based on the way that they have their districts, Texas is going to be heavily red. How important that Georgia swing back and forth in these last couple of elections means to everybody. And now you're putting more emphasis on the quote unquote major players in that situation. So if Texas does this, the way that I'm seeing it, and you have that wash with Cali, now you're trying to get all the other states that have a major city in Atlanta, Denver, Vegas, Chicago. They're going to end up determining the rest of it, or it sets a precedent to where they get dismantled as well,
yeah,
right? The same way that they're doing to Austin, Dallas, and Houston. And now it's just going to be a back and forth game of that situation. Oddly enough, in majority of the situations, your major cities happen to be in blue states, but the issue with it is it's not necessarily fair either way. And it has, back to the national stage, it has the electoral college implications. So while the president's supposed to, or presidency is supposed to be determined state by state, the congressional district shape campaign strategy. And now you have a safe GOP seat, which means Republicans can reallocate resources to swing districts in other states. So while it's a slippery slope,
it's
should it,
it's
or, okay, how about this? Should it be mandatory that a state has a guideline? And should the guidelines match from state to state?
the guidelines should match state to state, honestly, because the population is more than enough of a swing as is, right? Like, if you're this isn't applied to the Senate per se, but if you talk about if you bring the Senate into this where each representative has two votes, or has two senators, um uh state like Texas has nearly this at like power dynamic wise, it's an equal amount of power between Texas and say like North Dakota. But because North Dakota has one, I think it's maybe like 1/6 of the population of Texas,
Hmm.
their Senate voting power is effectively multiplied, um because there's so few people there. The
Right.
issue with that becomes is that if everybody goes into like an all-out war and trying to redistrict and all these other type of things, you end up in this position where no one's vote matters. No one. You will either, if you're blue or red, somebody will decide what it is for you and you call it a day there. And that's it. That's all. That's all that you get. The larger implication here though is that Republicans have a plan. They've
Hmm.
stood on their plan. Democrats do not have a plan, and they haven't had a plan. They like there is no plan to bring back. There's no plan to fight back. No matter where you lean, no matter where you lean, you're running into a scenario where things will be unfair, fundamentally unfair.
Right.
You run the risk of your voice being erased no matter which side of the totem pole you like we're not talking about democracy being a fundamental aspect of the experience. We're talking about it being a show. We're talking about it being a movie. We're talking about it being a theater, while well-funded people behind the scenes decide what you're going to do regardless of your say.
Um, we're we're obviously aware of the minority representation impact. And I'm gonna touch right back on what you just said. It's a segue point as well. But specifically because Texas has such a large Latino and Black population, when you weaken the voting influence like that, because it's not too many other places, especially down south, considering where you have that much of a mix to where it's not equal to the white counterparts, but if you combine them together, it's not far off. Which is why we're seeing some of the moves that we're seeing specifically in this state itself. So when you weaken that voting influence and reduce the number of minority voices in Congress, you're potentially influencing the national policy across the board on immigration, voting rights, healthcare, and education. And we see where they're going with that. This is before the redistricting. All of those that I just mentioned, that immigration piece, they talk about ICE damn near every day. You can't escape it. You can't run around it. The voting rights, it's been controversy for the last two elections, specifically on voting rights and how they've gone. Healthcare is always up in the air, and then the education, just like we started off at the top of this, and implicating religious standards in the classroom. And let's not say be vague with religious, implicating Christianity standards in the classroom. Let's get even further into implicating white Christianity standards in the classroom that don't apply to anybody else other than themselves. So now once you take all of those aspects away, and just like you were saying, you've eliminated, it doesn't matter whether you're Democratic or Republican. Are we dancing around the bullet train to fascism? We're saying a bunch of words. I'm asking you because I'm that's how I'm potentially seeing it. Potentially is being very generous of me right now, but if this successfully goes through, how are we calling it?
It's mm, it's a hard call. It's a very hard call. And I want to be careful with like how I call it because I don't lean on that side. Like like, you know what I'm saying? Like I'm not in alignment with what's happening within the United States currently from a political standpoint. And so
Mhm,
I think it's very easy for me to, you know, call it fascism or anything along those lines, or anything like that. But I'm pretty sure the other side, for the people who, the working class, like we're the working class, feels like that their vote matters, or that they're finally being heard, or that they're finally being understood, and blase, and like we can talk about what the implications of that means. But we are leaning to a one party system where one belief all over all other beliefs, um and that's it. That's how it shakes out. Yes, you can still vote today. There are many different registration acts and restrictions that are going on in place to slowly erode those. um there are many movements across, Republican states, specifically similar, very similar to how Texas is implementing they're implementing their 10 commandments and their no cell phones in school, and making time for prayer times and Bible study and all that kind of stuff. There's a fundamental eroding of religion and state, church and state,
mhm.
happening here in the United States. And you know, it looks a lot closer to China than we would probably like to admit to.
And I want to be clear, especially for myself. I believe I can comfortably speak just for this pod and this movement, even though it's just the two of us, but our other brothers there. I would call it this way, even if it was a blue redistricting, because if you voted for the Republican Party, you wouldn't see it as such. Because I understand the opposite side of it. Just being studious enough to know it is advantageous. Texas is a fast growing state. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. For
Yeah,
as big as it's always has been, it is consistently growing. We saw the numbers that were being cranked out even during the midst of the pandemic. We saw everybody flooding here. The amount of migration that's been going on from the West, from the Midwest, like the only competitive places we were looking at was probably Florida and Atlanta specifically. And they weren't seeing the tech boom that we were seeing, the new Silicon Valley, whatever the case may be, right? So with it being a fast growing state, and with that having that capability, that growth comes with the responsibility to rebalance the districts. If you're leaning that way, that's what that looks like. That new map, if you're a Republican voter, you would think ensures a fair population distribution by their standards, right? While supposedly keeping the interests of the communities together. Because when you look at the redistricting maps, there are bigger districts. It's more area representative. It just looks different when you're already here, because those areas that they would be merging together are drastically different. And that's
yeah,
why that prison gerrymandering piece is such a key component of that. So with that result of having those 5 new districts that align with the political lean, those districts now directly reflect how Texans actually voted in 2024. That would be the belief, right? So it's not, if you're a Republican, you may not, or let me be more specific, because it does seem to have some, we're experiencing discourse even amongst the Republican Party on supporting Trump specifically, right? So if you're a Trump supporter, the districts would reflect how it was supposed to look in 2024, because those would have been 10 additional points to Trump himself, right? And it's not a partisan manipulation in your eyes. It's an update to match today's political reality.
yeah,
I could get that, right? And because Republicans already represent most of Texas, and because Texans are usually overwhelmingly votes Republican, the map doesn't change the truth to you. Just makes it more rural. Make sure that the rural and suburban area voices aren't drowned out by the urban political machines. That's how you would look at it. I can comfortably understand the chessboard here. I can also comfortably add that either side, whether it was blue or red, we would call it bullshit. We would call we would call this type of move bullshit, because I still don't think it's advantageous even to the other states such as Illinois, Cali, and whatnot to keep what appears to be a movement of the goalposts. So Texas does this. We already should just go ahead and predict that other states are going to respond or retaliate. Who those states will be, that's where the next question is. So I guess I would ask you, if this goes through, which it most likely will, Cali already does what Cali does. So who would be the responders from your side, or from in your eyes? Who, you know what I'm saying?
Uh, I think mm, California, California won't respond probably like in the same way. It won't be like a one for one because California's their redistricting is independent. So it's not something that we have to worry about there from like their side. Um, but I think immediately what happens is that other red states, so Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, I think North Dakota's red, but these other red states um will immediately similar legislation. And the truth is that not every Democrat is going to be able to flee the state.
Right.
And the other side of this is if the FBI is activated to apprehend, right? Because the FBI is a national agency, it would be participating in state politics effectively. But if the FBI is actually activated to apprehend them, since the individual states themselves cannot extradite, then we have a much larger issue on hand, because what are any of the Democrats going to do? And vice versa, if this happens in any of the Democratic led states, um and it passes, then again you end up in these situations where you're landlocked.
Mm-hmm.
To get your voice heard, you may have to physically move, and even then it may not actually matter.
Right. And I think where this one is so major, because most of the states that you just named aren't like Texas or California, in the essence of Texas is running around with four major cities in one state.
Yeah.
Cali, same thing, with between LA, San Diego, San Francisco. In most other states, you have your Chicago, and then there's everything else. Atlanta, and then there's everything else, right? Even your respective major city. If you go to Charlotte, um, Florida with the Miamis, like they might be blue, but you can see them going red because they are red states as well, where it's different here. So if you set that precedent where you divided up all the major contenders and how much of a swing that is, because we saw it in 2020, everywhere else was red except for those four spots, those four blips on Texas swung everything, and those were the cities, the major cities. So that back and forth, at least to me, that we might see from the states leans into what you're saying. You become landlocked, and then now you got the Supreme Court pressure. Legal challenges are inevitable. Fair. We got that. But the outcome could set a national legal precedent on racial gerrymandering. And that's the overall fear here. The racial gerrymandering and the voting right enforcement affecting how every state draws maps for the next decade. This is considering Duke already has 2028 hats in the Oval Office. I don't know if you peeped that, which
Yeah,
is
yeah,
also illegal. But you feel me? So he already got 2028 hats. And I guess where we could move to that very last segment, unless you have more to cover, what could possibly be done? And that's why I asked the guideline question, because it would at least give the constituents some type of movement and understanding on what to possibly do. But what we're seeing out here in Texas is, man, they're making an executive decision.
yeah,
No ifs, ands, or buts about it. They're making a cold executive decision, and you can't do nothing about it. And it's scary too. So I'll speak as someone that lives here. As of right now, and probably for the last handful of elections, man, Abbott hasn't had no competition on the Democratic side. And that Beto tried, they got him clear out of there. Bro,
yeah,
they pulled up that
yeah,
DUI from back in the gap and said nah, and got him clear out of there. Right? Ted Cruz keeps winning. I don't care how you feel about him. It's hard to respect a man that lets his wife get called out on the national stage, and for a place like Texas to allow him to keep winning. Doesn't matter what side of the fence you vote for. Insane. There's not, to your point earlier, there's not much of a response from the Democratic Party to do anything else about anything else. So what can we do?
what can we do? I mean, it's I'm not gonna hold you. Normally I would have a very opinionated piece about what we can do, but like to be frank, I'm not sure, because what does it take to bring something like California's independent board into fruition? What does
Belt
it
to
take?
ass.
I don't know off the top of my head, and I didn't do the research to find out beforehand. So like, what does it take? Each state should have a independent board that sets these lines. There should be some sort of, I agree in that there should be some sort of um national guidelines, but the issue with guidelines is guidelines can be ignored. Yo, that's the issue with guidelines. Like, how do you enforce national guidelines to each individual state? I think at the very least, each individual state should have its own independent board that reports this and this information, because it is publicly available currently in each individual state. But how publicly accessible is it? You
Right.
know, for anybody who's listening to this today, without using Google, do you know where to go get your state's congressional lines?
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't, I have to Google personally. I have to Google. I have to Google where my state's congressional laws are, how they go about, why they go about, what website they're on, that kind of stuff. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's like publicly available versus publicly accessible are two completely different things. This has to be something that is within your conscious. It has to be automatic. You should be able to recall it, just like you
Yeah.
can recall like your voting place, or you know, the district, like those kind of, it has to be easily recallable. But like right now, I don't have a solution. I don't even have a suggestion for one, because
For
it's cooked.
those,
We're cooked.
yeah. For those out here in Texas, if you don't know, you can get it at the Department of Transportation, whether it be physically in person or online. This is the congressional maps piece. I again know this just because
Which
of what I
is
do.
nuts. You have to go to the Department of Transportation to get congressional lines.
Because they'll have them on hand, right? So you could get them online at that website, or you can go in person. You can also, I think it's redistricting.gov or redistricting.capital. One of those. One of those. I know this stuff just because of what I do. But to your point, most people don't. So I'm giving that information out. Most of y'all got pocket computers, and to build off of what you're saying, or more or less not even build. I don't know either. I don't know either. And this is probably one of the many times, and at the first time as an adult, where it looked like, damn, the lack thereof with information this past election might have been some cement that is setting. And what it would take to go back, you would have to break something. And and that's a thick cement slab there. And I don't know if that's how, our predecessors in previous generations might have felt, or they just were able to look forward to the next midterm, to the next national election, and then maybe get some things here and there. Because essentially, it's not. Let's be very clear here. This goes again for both sides and all colors. They're not setting it up for you to win. And you know this. You just try to win, do a little bit better each time. They're not setting you up to win. They don't get it confused as if we're just only focusing on the minority issue. This is a everybody issue. This is across the board, unless you happen to be in that high 1% of the class. So what can we do for this particular type of thing? Hell, man, they're getting away with it because I don't think most people were able to think about this as an opportunity or a possibility.
And they're removing your ability to think at all. If we start you start talking about news cycles, you start talking about the emergence of
Yep.
AI, you start talking about the, like, Siri and autocorrect, and like, you know what I'm saying? Like, when was the last time you picked up an encyclopedia? When was the last time you picked up a dictionary? When was the last time you tried like spell like they're like, technology is is progressing. It's also being weaponized. The end goal is that convenience effectively renders you pointless. It renders you,
Yep.
useless. And so misinformation is rampant, and there's no place, because you can, like, here's the thing, because you can get information literally anywhere, everywhere, at any point in time, you're not actually utilizing or exercising that to get the information that you need to do cross references, to do research. You're not doing it because it's accessible to you. You can do it at any point in time, so you don't do it at any point in time. You don't do it any other time. Meanwhile, you go off hearsay and gossip, social media clips, whatever stands out to you is what becomes the thing. Misinformation is completely rampant. It's completely rampant. And you would have to to your point, you would have to fundamentally shift how people are educated today, the convenience of,
Hmm.
to actually get us to go back to do some digging and to do some research to actually find out the information that we need. And that, of course, is not going to happen. Like I say, you gotta most of us gotta Google the website for our district lines.
Hindsight's 2020, and I think we could kind of wrap it up here. Hindsight's 2020, and understanding. Hey, man, when they started burning the books, they started burning your opportunity for growth and development that you might have
Oof.
passed on beforehand. And so we've been emphasizing reading for the last 4 5 pods. Go get a book while you still can. Be this reliance on technology, just like you were saying, has become crippling. We are in a position where the best thought process comes from a version that somebody heard, that they previously heard from somebody else. It's not an original thought. It's not functioning. And unfortunately, many people in their conversations can't get past step one of a thought process. There is no building. Is everything is surface level. And unfortunately, because of the way technology works, a lot of people have bought into, now all the media is fake. You don't know the difference between a chat GPT, AI, or whatever functions being used, like you said, Siri, um, and somebody actually trying to have a thought. And unfortunately, when you try to lean into somebody's thought, they ain't saying nothing either. You're saying a bunch of shit, but ain't saying shit at the same time.
And if they
You-
are saying something, you usually triggered by what they're saying, and so now you want to fight, you angry, you're not even listening to what they have to say.
and you might not even realize why you angry, because sometimes a lot of times dumb people feel angry. And that's not to disrespect where you might be at, because there's also people that are just flat out angry at having to deal with dumb people. It goes both ways, man. And especially during this, it's too damn hot for me to have to listen to your stupidity. I understand that wholeheartedly. But when you're in the process, where we're at now, I feel like we're originating. We're traveling aimlessly. We're traveling aimlessly, and we need to get back to having some type of goal or direction. So we don't know what to do, but we wanted to make sure that you're still at least informed on what is happening to try to prep somehow. Books, books, prayer, and more prayer. You know,
Books and
and so
prayers. Look,
books and
find your
prayers, man.
guidance.
Yeah.
Find your guidance. We've been talking about this for like 4 episodes now. Find your guidance. Make prayer, and however you decide to pray, read books, whatever you decide to pick up and read, but do it consistently. Find your guidance, because, like I said, regardless of which side you rock on, and just for everybody as an ending piece, you're the working class.
Yes.
Okay. It
Say it
is
again for
it
the
is
people in the
not
back.
it is not red versus blue. It is working versus the 1%. It is not Christianity versus Islam. It is the 1%. You are catching the boot regardless. You think you're in alignment, but you are catching the boot. You are catching the boot. Wake up. You're making enemies of people who are dealing with the same things that you're dealing with. You're blaming each other. It's a distraction. You're being distracted because you think
Yeah.
you have the opportunity to be at the 1%. And maybe you do, but for every one of you who do or who can, there are over 100,000 that will be exploited because of it.
And and
So that really
I,
brings the question: or do you really want change, or do you just want the one who can be? You just want to be the one who can exploit.
that part. So I'll wrap it up with one: participate in conversations like these. Add your feedback to what we just said. Ask your questions. Let's dive into it, because the that type of information that we just ran through, we said a lot. We said a lot with not too much direction to an extent, because there's so much happening and it's hard to condense it when you're trying to just get the message out to the people. But at the same time, you don't want to be an opposite math behind it, man. No one when you have the opportunity to talk about it and read on the front end, you don't necessarily have to be someone that learns late in life, because it might be too late. And that's the goal here. So discipline, discipline plays a role here, and discipline is not the rivalry of enthusiasm. Please remember that. Please remember that, man. So that has been a one-off episode. Texas is doing Gerry things, and it's not even the Gerry you usually hate. Please help us focus and lock in with what's going on. And I would also like to end for the doof that moved your folks out to Russia. You could, I'll come back to you later. This has been a one-off with Keep It Clean, brother Bodega, your brother Ray. I appreciate y'all coming out and listening. Subscribe. Please like, comment, and subscribe on all the channels. You can find us more on YouTube. We appreciate you again for getting us to 100. Now we push for 1,000, because it's not just necessarily 1,000 subscribers. It's 1,000 communicators. It's 1,000 cleaners. We trying to all tap in and build that community. It's not just for show. It's not talk. If you see them in Atlanta, touch bases with them in Atlanta. If you see me out in Texas, touch bases with me out in Texas, and let's continue to push. Or St. Louis for for brother Ev out there. So continue to tap in with us. You can find us on all DSPs. Follow us on Instagram. We appreciate y'all and much love to y'all.
Peace.